In the quiet town of Maidenhead, where the Thames winds gently through ancient meadows, something extraordinary was about to unfold. It wasn't just another royal visit or ceremonial ribbon-cutting. This was the day when Britain's longest-reigning monarch would smile her most meaningful smile, not for cameras or crowds, but for the dying. The hospice stood gleaming white against the autumn sky, its windows reflecting the golden leaves that danced in the October breeze. Inside, patients who had been given weeks to live were preparing to meet their queen. Outside, a community that had fought for 15 years to build this sanctuary was holding its collective breath. What none of them knew was that this single day would change everything, not just for the families who would find comfort within these walls, but for a monarchy learning to show its heart, and for a queen who would discover that her greatest legacy wasn't written in history books, but in the gentle hands that would care for the vulnerable. This is the true story of how a simple hospice inauguration became a moment that redefined what it means to serve, to care, and to face life's most difficult truths with grace. Dr. Sarah Mitchell had always believed that dying should be as dignified as living. Standing in her cramped office at the local hospital, surrounded by towers of medical files and half-empty coffee cups, she stared at the latest statistics that made her stomach churn. Maidenhead, a town of 60,000 people, had no dedicated hospice care. Patients in their final days were shuttled between overcrowded hospital wards or left to struggle at home with families who felt helpless and alone. The idea first came to her on a rain-soaked Tuesday evening in 2008. She had just finished her rounds when she encountered Margaret Thompson, an 82-year-old woman with terminal cancer, sitting alone in the hospital corridor. Margaret's family had gone home for the night, unable to afford taking more time off work to stay with her. The old woman looked up at Sarah with eyes that held both fear and resignation. "Doctor, I just want to go somewhere peaceful," Margaret whispered. "Somewhere that doesn't smell like disinfectant and despair." That conversation haunted Sarah for weeks. She began researching hospice care models across the country, staying up late into the night reading about facilities that treated death not as a medical failure, but as a natural part of life's journey. She learned about places where patients could have their pets visit, where families could cook meals together, where children could play in gardens while saying goodbye to grandparents. Sarah wasn't the only one who had noticed the gap in local care. At the monthly community health meeting in November 2008, she met James Crawford, a local businessman whose wife had died of breast cancer the previous year. James had watched helplessly as his beloved Emma spent her final weeks in a sterile hospital room, surrounded by beeping machines and fluorescent lights. She kept asking if we could go home. James told Sarah over coffee after the meeting. But our house wasn't equipped for the level of care she needed. I felt like I failed her. Together, they began to envision something different. Not just a place where people went to die, but a place where they could truly live their remaining days with dignity, surrounded by beauty and compassion. They imagined rooms filled with natural light, gardens where patients could sit among flowers, and spaces where families could gather to share meals and memories. The first public meeting about the hospice project was held in the basement of St. Luke's Church on a cold February evening in 2009. Sarah had expected maybe 20 people to show up. Instead, nearly 100 community members filled the room, spilling out into the hallway. There was Mrs. Patterson, the retired teacher whose husband had fought lung cancer alone at home. There was young David Chun, whose mother had died in a busy hospital ward with no privacy for final goodbyes. There was Father O'Brien, who had comforted too many families in hospital waiting rooms that felt more like prisons than places of healing. "We need this," said Eleanor Price, a local councilwoman whose voice carried the weight of personal experience. "My sister died last year, and we had to watch her struggle in a system that wasn't designed for dignity. We can do better. We must do better." The energy in that room was electric. People began sharing their stories, their losses, their dreams for something better. They talked about their loved ones who had faced death without the comfort and support they deserved. They spoke of feeling powerless in a system that seemed to view death as a failure rather than a natural part of life that deserved as much care and attention as birth. But dreams, as they quickly learned, required more than passion. They needed money, lots of it. The estimated cost for building a proper hospice facility was £3.2 million. For a small town like Maidenhead, it seemed like an impossible mountain to climb. Sarah and James, now joined by a growing committee of volunteers, began the long process of fundraising. They organized bake sales and charity runs. They held auction evenings and sponsored walks along the Thames. Local businesses began contributing, starting with small donations that gradually grew larger as word spread about the project. The committee worked tirelessly to research the best practices in hospice care. They visited facilities across England, taking notes on everything from room layouts to staff training programs. They learned about the importance of natural lighting, the therapeutic value of garden spaces, and the need for family areas where relatives could stay overnight without feeling like they were in the way. One particularly influential visit was to St. Christopher's Hospice in London, where they met with nurses who had been working in palliative care for decades. Sister Mary Catherine, a soft-spoken woman with gentle hands and kind eyes, showed them around the facility. "The most important thing to remember," she told them as they walked through a sunny patient room where an elderly man was reading to his grandchildren, "is that this isn't about death. It's about life. It's about making sure that whatever time people have left is filled with as much love, comfort, and dignity as possible." The word stayed with Sarah as they continued their fundraising efforts. This wasn't just about building a building. It was about creating a place where life could be celebrated even in its final stages. It was about giving families the gift of time together without the stress of medical complexity overwhelming their ability to simply be present with each other. Local support grew steadily. The Maidenhead Advertiser began featuring regular updates on the hospice campaign. Radio Berkshire interviewed committee members about their vision. Slowly but surely, the community began to rally around the project. By 2010, they had raised enough money to purchase land on the outskirts of town. The site they chose was perfect, 3 acres of gently rolling meadow bordered by mature oak trees, with views across the Thames Valley. It was peaceful and private, yet easily accessible for families traveling from across the region. The groundbreaking ceremony in spring 2011 was a celebration tinged with bittersweet emotion. Margaret Thompson, the woman whose words had first inspired Sarah, was no longer alive to see the dream taking shape. But her daughter Julie was there, along with hundreds of other community members who had contributed their time, money, and hope to the project. "Mom would have loved this place," Julie said as she helped turn the first spade of earth. "She always said that how we treat people in their most vulnerable moments says everything about who we are as a community." Construction began immediately, but progress was slower than anyone had hoped. There were delays with permits, complications with the specialized medical equipment installations, and the ongoing challenge of raising the final funds needed to complete the project. The committee continued their fundraising efforts, organizing everything from sponsor bike rides to elaborate dinner galas. The design of the building reflected everything they had learned about creating spaces for healing and comfort. Each of the 12 patient rooms would have large windows overlooking the gardens, with space for families to stay overnight. There would be a communal kitchen where relatives could prepare favorite meals, a children's playroom for visiting grandchildren, and a meditation garden where people could find quiet moments of reflection. The most innovative feature was the Remembrance Room, a peaceful space where families could spend time with their loved ones after death, without the clinical atmosphere of a hospital morgue. It was designed to look like a beautiful bedroom, with soft lighting and comfortable seating for family members who needed time to process their grief. As 2012 turned into 2013, the building began to take recognizable shape. Local contractors donated time and materials. The garden was designed by volunteers from the Royal Horticultural Society. Even the interior decoration was a community effort, with local artists contributing paintings and sculptures that would make the space feel more like a home than a medical facility. But the real breakthrough came in late 2013, when the committee received word that their application for royal patronage had been accepted. The Queen herself would inaugurate the Maidenhead Hospice, bringing national attention to their local project and providing the final boost needed to complete the fundraising. Sarah could hardly believe it when she received the official letter from Buckingham Palace. After 5 years of relentless work, of countless setbacks and small victories, their dream was about to become reality. The hospice would open its doors with the blessing of the monarch herself. The news energized the entire community. Local businesses offered to sponsor additional amenities. Volunteer applications poured in from people wanting to be part of the hospice team. The waiting list of medical professionals wanting to work at the facility grew longer each week. As the inauguration date approached, Sarah often found herself walking through the nearly completed building in the early morning hours before the construction crews arrived. She would stand in the patient rooms, imagining the families who would gather there to share final moments together. She would walk through the gardens, picturing children playing while their parents found comfort in the knowledge that their loved ones were being cared for with dignity and compassion. The dream that had started with one conversation in a hospital corridor was about to become a reality. Margaret Thompson's wish for somewhere peaceful was finally coming true, not just for her, but for countless others who would find comfort within these walls in the years to come. The hospice represented more than just a building or even a service. It represented the power of a community to come together and create something beautiful out of shared loss and hope. It proved that ordinary people, motivated by love and determination, could build extraordinary things. As Sarah locked up the building after her final pre-inauguration inspection, she thought about all the people who had made this moment possible. The volunteers who had given countless hours, the donors who had contributed everything from pounds to pence, the medical professionals who had shared their expertise, and, most importantly, the families whose stories of loss had motivated everyone to keep pushing forward even when the task seemed impossible. Tomorrow, the Queen would arrive to officially open the doors. But for Sarah and the hundreds of others who had poured their hearts into this project, the real victory was already complete. They had transformed grief into hope, loss into legacy, and dreams into something solid and lasting that would serve their community for generations to come. The morning sun cast long shadows across the hospice grounds as Rebecca Walsh, the newly appointed facility director, stood surveying the scene of controlled chaos that had become her workplace. 3 weeks before the royal inauguration, every detail had to be perfect, and the pressure was unlike anything she had experienced in her 20-year career in healthcare administration. Rebecca had been selected for the position after an exhaustive search process. Her background included managing several successful hospice programs in London, but nothing had prepared her for the unique challenges of opening a brand new facility under the scrutiny of royal protocol officers. She arrived each morning at 6 o'clock, armed with multiple clipboards and an ever-growing list of tasks that seemed to multiply overnight. The staff recruitment process had been both challenging and inspiring. Word about the hospice had spread throughout the healthcare community, attracting applications from some of the most experienced palliative care professionals in the country. Dr. Michael Roberts, the medical director, had previously worked at one of London's most prestigious hospices. Nurse manager Linda Foster brought 15 years of experience from a hospice in Oxford that was considered a model for compassionate care. "We're not just building a team," Rebecca explained to the group of newly hired staff members during their first meeting. "We're creating a culture. Every person who walks through our doors, whether they're a patient, family member, or visitor, should feel that they're in a place where they're valued and cared for." The training program was intensive. Staff members spent weeks learning not just about medical procedures, but about the philosophy of hospice care. They practiced difficult conversations with families. They learned about different cultural approaches to death and dying. They studied the layout of the building until they could navigate it blindfolded, ensuring that they could focus entirely on patients rather than fumbling with unfamiliar surroundings. Meanwhile, the royal protocol requirements added an entirely new layer of complexity to the opening preparations. Chief Inspector Patricia Williams from the Metropolitan Police arrived to conduct security assessments. She was a no-nonsense professional who had coordinated dozens of royal events. But even she seemed impressed by the challenges presented by a medical facility. "We need to balance security with accessibility," she explained to Rebecca during one of their planning meetings. "The Queen will want to meet patients and families, but we can't disrupt the therapeutic environment. It's a delicate balance." The security preparations were extensive but discreet. Plainclothes officers visited the hospice repeatedly, memorizing every entrance and exit. Background checks were conducted on every staff member, volunteer, and contractor who would be present during the royal visit. Emergency evacuation procedures were rehearsed until they became second nature. The gardens required special attention from both security and horticultural perspectives. Head gardener Thomas Mitchell, a quiet man in his 50s who had previously maintained the grounds at Windsor Great Park, worked 18-hour days ensuring that every flower bed was immaculate. The timing was critical. The autumn blooms needed to be at their peak for the October inauguration. "Her Majesty appreciates gardens," Thomas explained to his volunteer helpers as they planted the final roses. "These flowers will be photographed and seen around the world. They need to represent not just our hospice, but the care and attention we put into everything we do here." The interior design team faced their own unique challenges. Every piece of furniture, every painting, every decorative element had to serve multiple purposes. It needed to create a warm, home-like environment for patients and families, while also being appropriate for a royal visit that would be covered by international media. Interior designer Sophie Chun had donated her services to the project, viewing it as one of the most meaningful assignments of her career. She spent weeks selecting artwork that would be uplifting without being overly cheerful, choosing colors that would be calming but not depressing, and arranging furniture that would facilitate intimate family gatherings while accommodating the formal requirements of a royal ceremony. "Every choice matters," Sophie told her team as they hung the final paintings in the family lounge. "A patient's family might spend their last hours together in this room. We want them to feel surrounded by beauty and peace, not by institutional coldness." The administrative challenges were equally daunting. The hospice needed to be fully operational by the time of the Queen's visit, which meant that they would be admitting their first patients just days before the inauguration. Rebecca worked closely with local hospitals and general practitioners to identify appropriate candidates, patients who would benefit from hospice care, but who were well enough to participate in or at least not be disturbed by the royal visit. The first patient to be admitted was Arthur Stevens, a 78-year-old former teacher with advanced pancreatic cancer. Arthur had specifically requested to be transferred to the new hospice because he wanted to be part of its inaugural chapter. His wife Helen was initially nervous about the timing, worried that the royal visit might disrupt his care. "Nonsense," Arthur told her with a weak but determined smile. "I've been teaching for 50 years, and I never got to meet the Queen. This might be my last chance to make history." Dr. Roberts spent extra time with Arthur and Helen, explaining how the royal visit would be managed to ensure minimal disruption to patient care. "Your husband's comfort and dignity are our top priorities," he assured Helen. "The Queen understands that this is a working hospice, not just a ceremonial venue." As more patients were admitted, the staff began to settle into their routines. Night nurse Jennifer Murphy, who had previously worked at a busy hospital, was amazed by the difference in atmosphere. "It's so peaceful here," she told Rebecca during a late-night shift. "Even with all the preparation for the royal visit going on, there's something special about this place." The patients and families seemed to feel it too. The volunteer program was one of Rebecca's proudest achievements. More than 100 community members had applied to volunteer at the hospice, far more than they could accommodate. The selected volunteers underwent extensive training in everything from patient interaction to coffee preparation. Many of them were people who had lost loved ones and wanted to give back by helping other families through similar experiences. Mary Patterson, a retired librarian whose husband had died of cancer 5 years earlier, became one of the most dedicated volunteers. She spent her days reading to patients, helping with correspondence, and simply sitting with people who needed companionship. "I know what it's like to feel alone in those final days," she explained. "If I can make even one family feel less isolated, then this place has served its purpose." The media attention surrounding the royal visit created additional pressures and opportunities. Rebecca found herself fielding calls from journalists around the world who wanted to cover the inauguration. She worked closely with the palace press office to ensure that coverage would be respectful and focused on the hospice's mission rather than sensationalizing the patient's conditions. Local media coverage was particularly important to the hospice team. The Maidenhead Advertiser had followed the project from its inception, and their coverage would help local families understand what services were available. Radio Berkshire planned extensive coverage of the inauguration, including interviews with staff members and families who had been involved in the fundraising campaign. The final week before the inauguration was a whirlwind of activity. Catering services practiced preparing meals for the royal luncheon, while also ensuring that patient meal service would continue uninterrupted. The IT department conducted final tests of all communication systems, ensuring that medical equipment would not be affected by the additional security and media equipment being installed. Rebecca held daily briefings with department heads, reviewing every aspect of the royal visit timeline. The Queen would arrive at precisely 11:30 a.m., tour the facility for 45 minutes, meet with patients and families for 30 minutes, attend the formal dedication ceremony for 20 minutes, and depart by 1:15 p.m. Every moment was choreographed, but with enough flexibility to accommodate the unpredictable nature of healthcare settings. The nursing staff faced the unique challenge of maintaining normal patient care routines while accommodating the extraordinary circumstances of the royal visit. Charge nurse Patricia Wells developed special protocols for medication administration, family visits, and emergency procedures that would ensure continuity of care regardless of what was happening elsewhere in the building. "Our patients come first, always," Patricia reminded her team during their final briefing. "Whether it's the Queen visiting or any other day, our job is to provide the best possible care with dignity and compassion." 3 days before the inauguration, Rebecca received the final confirmation from Buckingham Palace. Everything was approved. The security arrangements were in place. The press credentials were distributed. The hospice was ready to welcome its most distinguished visitor. That evening, after the construction crews and security teams had left for the day, Rebecca walked through the quiet halls of the hospice. The patient rooms were softly lit, with families keeping vigil by bedsides. The gardens were perfectly manicured, with flowers that would provide a beautiful backdrop for the next day's photographs. The common areas were arranged to accommodate both intimate family gatherings and formal ceremonies. In the meditation garden, she sat on one of the benches that had been donated by a family whose mother had died in the overcrowded hospital ward that had first inspired Dr. Sarah Mitchell's vision. The plaque on the bench read simply, "In memory of Margaret Thompson, who taught us that everyone deserves to die with dignity." Rebecca thought about all the people who had made this moment possible. The fundraising committee who had worked tirelessly for 6 years. The construction workers who had donated overtime hours. The medical equipment companies who had provided equipment at cost. The countless community members who had contributed everything from major donations to handmade quilts for patient rooms. Tomorrow would bring cameras and crowds, speeches and ceremonies. But tonight, the hospice was exactly what it was meant to be, a place of peace where families could face life's most difficult moments surrounded by beauty, compassion, and hope. The inaugural patients were resting comfortably. The staff was prepared and confident. The building was beautiful and fully functional. Most importantly, the culture of compassionate care that Rebecca and her team had worked so hard to establish was already evident in every interaction, every gentle touch, every quiet conversation in the hallways. As she locked up the building and headed home for what would probably be her last good night's sleep for several days, Rebecca felt a deep sense of pride and anticipation. Tomorrow, the Maidenhead Hospice would officially open its doors with the blessing of the Queen herself. But in her heart, she knew that the real blessing would come from every family who found comfort within these walls every patient who experienced dignity in their final days, and every staff member who went home each day knowing they had made a difference in someone's life. The morning of October 15th dawned crisp and clear, with autumn sunlight filtering through the golden leaves that surrounded the Maidenhead Hospice. By 7 a.m., the quiet country lane that led to the facility was already bustling with activity as media crews, security personnel, and hospice staff made their final preparations for the Queen's arrival. Rebecca Walsh stood in the main entrance, watching as police officers conducted their final security sweep. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the flowers in the reception area for the dozenth time. After months of planning, the day had finally arrived, and the weight of responsibility felt enormous. This wasn't just about protocol and ceremony. It was about representing the dreams and hopes of an entire community while ensuring that the hospice's most important function, caring for patients, continued seamlessly. In room 7, Arthur Stevens was being helped into his best suit by his wife Helen and daughter Claire. Despite his weakening condition, Arthur had insisted on being properly dressed to meet the Queen. He had been a history teacher for 50 years, and the significance of this moment wasn't lost on him. "Dad, you don't have to do this if you're not feeling up to it," Claire said gently, adjusting his tie. Arthur smiled, his eyes still bright despite his illness. "Sweetheart, I've taught about kings and queens for half a century. I'm not going to miss the chance to actually meet one." He paused, looking around the beautiful room with its view of the gardens. "Besides, this place is special. I want Her Majesty to see what her visit means to families like ours." Throughout the hospice, other patients and families were making similar preparations. Some chose to stay in their rooms, preferring the quiet dignity of their private spaces. Others gathered in the common areas, curious to witness this historic moment. The nursing staff moved efficiently between rooms, ensuring that medications were administered on schedule and that everyone was comfortable, regardless of whether they planned to participate in the royal visit. Dr. Sarah Mitchell arrived early, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. 6 years ago, she had been a tired hospital doctor with a dream of creating something better for dying patients and their families. Now, she was about to show the Queen of England through a facility that represented the very best in compassionate care. "How are you feeling?" asked James Crawford, the businessman whose wife's death had initially motivated him to join the hospice project. James had been selected to give the Queen a brief overview of the community fundraising effort that had made the hospice possible. Sarah took a deep breath, looking out at the gardens where Thomas Mitchell was making final adjustments to the flower arrangements. Nervous, excited, proud, terrified, she laughed, all at the same time. "But mostly, I just want Her Majesty to understand what this place represents. It's not just a building. It's proof that communities can come together to create something beautiful and meaningful." The royal motorcade was scheduled to arrive at precisely 11:30 a.m. At 11:15, Rebecca gathered the key staff members in the reception area for a final briefing. Dr. Roberts checked his watch nervously. Nurse manager Linda Foster smoothed her uniform one last time. Head of volunteers Mary Patterson clutched her folder of patient information, ready to share stories about the people who would benefit from the hospice's services. "Remember," Rebecca told the assembled group, "we're not just hosting a royal visit. We're showing the world what compassionate healthcare looks like. Be proud of what you've accomplished, but stay focused on why we're here, to serve patients and families with dignity and grace." The first sign of the royal arrival was the sound of police motorcycles in the distance. Then came the sleek black cars of the advanced security team. Finally, at exactly 11:30 a.m., the royal Bentley pulled up to the main entrance of the hospice. A hush fell over the assembled crowd as the car door opened, and Queen Elizabeth II stepped out onto the hospice grounds. She was smaller than many people expected, but her presence was immediately commanding. Dressed in a bright blue coat that complemented the autumn colors of the gardens, she smiled warmly as she was greeted by the Lord Lieutenant of Berkshire and the hospice board chairman. "Your Majesty, "Welcome to Maidenhead Hospice," said Board Chairman Robert Hughes, bowing deeply. "We are deeply honored by your presence here today." The Queen's response was warm and immediate. "Thank you for having me. I understand this facility represents years of community effort and dedication. I'm very much looking forward to seeing what you've accomplished." Rebecca was introduced first as the facility director responsible for the daily operations. "Your Majesty, it's our privilege to show you around our hospice. We believe we've created something truly special here, a place where patients and families can find peace and dignity during life's most challenging moments." The Queen nodded thoughtfully. "That's exactly what I hope to hear. Shall we begin our tour?" The first stop was the reception area, where the Queen admired the beautiful artwork donated by local artists. Sophie Chun, the interior designer, briefly explained how every element of the space had been chosen to create a welcoming, home-like atmosphere rather than an institutional feeling. "It's lovely," the Queen remarked, examining a painting of the Thames at sunset. "You can feel the warmth and care that went into creating this environment." From there, the group moved into the family lounge, where several relatives of current patients were waiting nervously. The Queen took time to speak with each of them, asking about their experiences at the hospice and offering words of comfort and encouragement. Margaret Wilson, whose father was receiving care in room 3, was overcome with emotion when the Queen asked about his condition. "He was so worried about being a burden to our family," Margaret explained. "But here, we can just focus on being together. The staff takes care of everything else." The Queen listened intently, nodding with understanding. "That's exactly as it should be. Family time is precious, especially during difficult periods." The tour continued into the patient care areas, where the Queen demonstrated remarkable ease in medical settings. She spoke comfortably with nurses about pain management techniques and asked thoughtful questions about the facility's approach to end-of-life care. In the medication room, Dr. Roberts explained the sophisticated systems used to ensure patient comfort. "We believe in aggressive comfort care," he told the Queen. "Our goal is to eliminate suffering while allowing patients to remain alert and engage with their families for as long as possible. That balance must be quite delicate," the Queen observed. "How do you train your staff to make those judgments?" The question led to a detailed discussion about the extensive training program that all hospice staff completed. Linda Foster, the nurse manager, explained how team members learn to recognize subtle changes in patient condition and adjust care accordingly. The most meaningful part of the tour came when the Queen visited several patient rooms. In each case, she demonstrated remarkable sensitivity and warmth, speaking quietly with patients and families about their experiences. Arthur Stevens was waiting in his wheelchair when the Queen entered room 7. Despite his obvious frailty, his eyes lit up when he saw her approach. "Your Majesty," he said, attempting to stand before being gently restrained by his daughter. "Please, don't get up," the Queen said warmly, approaching his wheelchair. "I understand you're a retired teacher. History teacher, Your Majesty. 50 years of trying to make the past come alive for young people." The Queen smiled broadly. "Then you'll appreciate the significance of this moment. You're helping to write the first chapter of this hospice's history. That's quite an honor." Arthur's eyes filled with tears. "I never thought of it that way, Your Majesty. I just wanted to be part of something special." "You are indeed part of something very special," the Queen assured him. "This hospice represents the very best of community spirit and compassionate care." The conversation continued for several more minutes, with the Queen asking Arthur about his teaching career and his family. When she finally moved on to the next room, Arthur was beaming with pride and joy. "I'll never forget this," he told his wife Helen. "She made me feel like I was important, like my story mattered." The Queen's visit to the children's room was particularly touching. 8-year-old Emma Collins was visiting her grandfather, who was a patient in room 12. Emma had been initially frightened by the hospice environment, but the colorful playroom and gentle staff had helped her feel more comfortable. When the Queen knelt down to speak with Emma, asking about her favorite toys and school subjects, the little girl gradually overcame her shyness. "Are you really the Queen?" Emma asked with wide eyes. I am indeed, the Queen replied with a gentle smile. And you're doing something very important by visiting your grandfather. That means a lot to him. It's sad that he's sick, Emma said solemnly. Yes, it is sad, the Queen agreed. But being here with him in this beautiful place where people take such good care of him helps make it a little bit better. The interaction lasted only a few minutes, but its impact was profound. Emma's mother, watching from nearby, was moved to tears by the Queen's gentle manner with her daughter. The tour concluded in the meditation garden, where Thomas Mitchell had arranged for a small dedication ceremony. A plaque would be unveiled to commemorate the Queen's visit and officially open the hospice. As the group gathered in the garden, surrounded by the carefully tended flowers and autumn foliage, the Queen was invited to say a few words before the official dedication. I've been deeply moved by what I've seen here today, she began, her voice carrying clearly in the crisp autumn air. This hospice represents something truly wonderful, a community's determination to care for its most vulnerable members with dignity, compassion, and grace. She paused, looking around at the assembled crowd of staff, volunteers, and community supporters. The people I've met today, patients, families, staff members, have shown me what it means to face life's greatest challenges with courage and hope. You've created more than a medical facility here. You've created a place where love can flourish even in the midst of sorrow. The formal dedication ceremony was brief, but deeply meaningful. The Queen unveiled the commemorative plaque, which read, Maidenhead Hospice, officially opened by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, October 15, 2014. A place of healing, hope, and dignity for all who enter here. As the ceremony concluded, the Queen spent additional time speaking informally with community members who had been involved in the fundraising campaign. She learned about the bake sales and charity runs, the donated materials, and volunteer hours, the years of determination that had transformed a dream into reality. You should all be very proud, she told Dr. Sarah Mitchell as the visit drew to a close. This hospice will serve your community for generations to come. More importantly, it will serve as a model for compassionate care throughout the country. As the royal motorcade prepared to depart, the Queen made one final request. She asked to return briefly to Arthur Stevens' room to say goodbye to the retired teacher who had captured her heart. Thank you for sharing your story with me, she told him quietly. You've taught me something important today about grace and courage. As the royal cars disappeared down the country lane, an extraordinary quiet settled over the hospice grounds. The cameras were packed away, the security cordons were removed, and normal operations resumed. But something fundamental had changed. The staff moved through their duties with renewed purpose, knowing that they had been recognized and blessed by the highest authority in the land. The patients and families felt a special pride in being part of the hospice's inaugural chapter. The community supporters who had worked so hard to make this day possible felt validated in their efforts and inspired to continue supporting the facility's mission. Most importantly, the Queen's visit had accomplished exactly what Rebecca and her team had hoped for. It had brought national attention to the importance of hospice care while demonstrating that dignity and compassion could flourish even in the face of life's most difficult challenges. As evening fell over the hospice, Arthur Stevens sat by his window, looking out at the gardens where the Queen had walked just hours before. His family gathered around him, still marveling at the day's extraordinary events. She was so kind, Helen said softly, so genuinely interested in everyone she met. Arthur nodded weakly, but his eyes were bright with satisfaction. I live a good life, he said, but today was special. Today I was part of something that will help people for years to come. The royal visit was over, but its impact would resonate through the halls of Maidenhead Hospice for decades to come, inspiring countless acts of compassion and care in the service of human dignity. In the days following the Queen's visit, something remarkable happened at Maidenhead Hospice that no amount of planning or preparation could have anticipated. The formal inauguration had been a resounding success, but the real transformation came in the quiet moments afterward, when the deeper meaning of that historic day began to unfold. Arthur Stevens had been profoundly changed by his encounter with the Queen. The retired teacher, who had been gradually withdrawing from life suddenly, found renewed energy and purpose. He began asking his daughter Claire to bring in photo albums and scrapbooks, wanting to share stories about his 50-year teaching career with other patients and their families. "Dad's like a different person," Claire confided to nurse Linda Foster during one of her daily visits. "For weeks, he's been so focused on dying. Now he's talking about living again, about making the most of whatever time he has left." The change in Arthur wasn't unusual. Throughout the hospice, patients and families seemed to have been touched by something beyond the excitement of a royal visit. Dr. Roberts noticed it first during his morning rounds the day after the inauguration. "There's a different energy here," he told Rebecca as they reviewed patient charts. "People seem more engaged, more hopeful. It's as if the Queen's visit gave them permission to find joy even in these circumstances." Rebecca had noticed it too. The common areas that had been carefully arranged for the royal visit were now genuinely being used by families. The family lounge buzzed with quiet conversations. The meditation garden saw a steady stream of visitors seeking peaceful moments of reflection. The children's playroom echoed with gentle laughter as grandchildren played while parents spent time with dying relatives. The transformation wasn't limited to patients and families. The staff members who had worked so hard to prepare for the royal visit found themselves operating at a new level of excellence. The weeks of intensive training and preparation had created habits of exceptional care that continued long after the cameras had departed. Nurse Jennifer Murphy, working her first week of regular shifts after the royal visit, was amazed by the cohesion of the team. "It's like we've been working together for years," she told her supervisor. "Everyone knows exactly what needs to be done, and they do it with such grace and professionalism." The impact extended far beyond the hospice walls. The extensive media coverage of the Queen's visit had brought national attention to Maidenhead Hospice, and inquiries began pouring in from other communities wanting to replicate their success. Dr. Sarah Mitchell found herself fielding calls from healthcare administrators across the country who wanted to learn about their fundraising strategies and care models. More importantly, the coverage had educated the public about the role of hospice care in the healthcare system. Many families who had never considered hospice as an option began asking their physicians about palliative care services. The stigma that often surrounded end-of-life care began to diminish as people saw the dignity and comfort that the hospice environment could provide. Local general practitioners began referring patients to the hospice with increased confidence. Dr. Patricia Wells, a family physician who had practiced in Maidenhead for 30 years, noticed the change immediately. "Before the hospice opened, I dreaded having conversations with families about end-of-life care," she explained during a meeting with the hospice medical team. "Now I can offer them hope. Not hope for a cure necessarily, but hope for dignity, comfort, and meaningful time together. That changes everything." The waiting list for hospice admission grew steadily, but rather than viewing this as a problem, Rebecca and her team saw it as an opportunity to expand their community outreach programs. They began offering support groups for families dealing with terminal diagnoses, providing guidance and emotional support even before patients were ready for direct hospice care. Mary Patterson, the retired librarian who had become one of the hospice's most dedicated volunteers, started a program called Story Circle, where patients and families could share memories and life experiences. The program had grown out of her conversations with Arthur Stevens, who had been so eager to talk about his teaching career and the thousands of students he had influenced over the years. "Everyone has a story worth telling," Mary explained to Rebecca as they watched a group of family members gathered around an elderly patient's bed, sharing memories and photographs. "The Queen's visit reminded us that every person here has lived a significant life. Our job is to help them celebrate that significance." The Story Circle sessions became one of the most popular programs at the hospice. Patients who had been reluctant to engage with other families gradually opened up as they heard others share their experiences. Children who were visiting dying grandparents began to understand the richness of their relatives' lives beyond their illness. One particularly moving session involved Emma Collins, the 8-year-old who had met the Queen during her visit. Emma had been struggling to understand her grandfather's illness, but when she heard other families sharing stories about their loved ones' careers and accomplishments, she began asking her grandfather to tell her about his work as a carpenter. "Grandpa built houses," she announced proudly during one story circle session. "He built them so strong that people are still living in them. The Queen probably lives in a house that's not as good as the ones my grandpa built." The comment brought gentle laughter from the other families, but it also represented a profound shift in how Emma viewed her grandfather. Instead of seeing only a sick man, she now saw a skilled craftsman whose work had provided homes for countless families. The Queen's visit had also inspired a wave of additional community support. Local businesses that had contributed to the original fundraising campaign began offering ongoing support through regular donations and volunteer programs. The Maidenhead Rotary Club established a fund to help families with travel expenses when visiting patients from out of town. The local Women's Institute started a program to provide home-cooked meals for families staying at the hospice. Perhaps most significantly, the royal visit had validated the hospice model in the eyes of healthcare policymakers. Within months of the Queen's visit, representatives from the National Health Service began studying the Maidenhead model as a template for expanding hospice care throughout the country. Dr. Michael Roberts was invited to present the hospice's care philosophy at medical conferences around England. His presentations always began with the same observation: the Queen's visit didn't change what we do here. It simply helped us understand why it matters so much. The physical legacy of the royal visit was preserved in small but meaningful ways throughout the hospice. The plaque the Queen had unveiled became a focal point in the meditation garden, but it was the less formal mementos that seemed to have the greatest impact on daily life at the facility. In Arthur Stevens' room, a small framed photograph of his conversation with the Queen sat on his bedside table. Visitors often asked about the picture, giving Arthur countless opportunities to share the story of that extraordinary day. The telling and retelling of that story became a source of strength and pride for him during his remaining weeks. The children's playroom featured a display case with photographs from the royal visit, including several pictures of the Queen speaking with young Emma Collins. The display helped other children understand that the hospice was a special place that important people cared about, reducing their anxiety about visiting sick relatives. The most unexpected outcome of the royal visit was its impact on the hospice staff's approach to their own families and personal lives. Many of them reported that working in an environment where every moment was treasured and every relationship was valued had changed how they approached their own relationships. Nurse Linda Foster began having weekly dinners with her elderly mother, something she had been too busy to prioritize before working in hospice. "Seeing these families make the most of their time together made me realize I was taking my own family for granted," she explained. Dr. Roberts started leaving work earlier to attend his daughter's soccer games, understanding in a new way that childhood moments were as precious and fleeting as the final days the hospice families were sharing. The cultural shift wasn't limited to the hospice staff. Throughout Maidenhead, people began talking more openly about death and dying, reducing the isolation that many families experienced when dealing with terminal illness. The local newspaper began running a regular column about hospice life, helping to normalize conversations about end-of-life care. Churches in the area started offering grief support groups, understanding that their role in supporting the hospice extended beyond the initial fundraising campaign. The library created a special collection of books about grief, healing, and end-of-life issues, making resources more accessible to families dealing with these challenges. 6 months after the royal visit, Rebecca stood in the same meditation garden where the Queen had unveiled the commemorative plaque. The hospice was operating at full capacity, with a waiting list that extended several weeks into the future. The staff had settled into routines of exceptional care, and the community support continued to grow stronger. Arthur Stevens had died peacefully 3 weeks after the royal visit, surrounded by his family in the room where he had met the Queen. His funeral had been attended by hundreds of people, including many hospice staff members and volunteers who had been touched by his courage and grace. At his memorial service, his daughter Claire read from a letter Arthur had written to his grandchildren about his experience meeting the Queen. She made me feel like my life had mattered, like the stories I had to tell were important. That's what this hospice does for everyone who comes here. It reminds us that every life has value right up to the very end. The letter had been published in the local newspaper, generating dozens of responses from community members who shared their own stories about losing loved ones and finding comfort in the hospice's mission. As Rebecca reflected on the transformation that had occurred since the royal visit, she realized that the Queen's presence had accomplished something beyond formal recognition or media attention. It had elevated the very concept of hospice care, showing everyone involved that their work was not just about managing death, but about celebrating life in all its complexity and beauty. The smile the Queen had shared with patients and families hadn't just been a moment of royal graciousness. It had been a recognition that even in the face of life's greatest challenges, there was room for joy, dignity, and hope. That smile had given permission for everyone at the hospice to believe that what they were doing was not just important, but sacred. The Maidenhead Hospice had become more than a medical facility. It had become proof that communities could come together to create something beautiful and meaningful, that death could be faced with courage and grace, and that every moment of life was worth celebrating and protecting. As the sun set over the gardens where the Queen had walked, Rebecca felt grateful for all the people who had made this transformation possible. From Dr. Sarah Mitchell's original dream to Arthur Stevens' brave determination to meet royalty, from the countless volunteers to the dedicated staff members, everyone had played a part in creating something that would serve families for generations to come. The royal visit had ended, but its impact would continue to ripple through the lives of everyone who entered the hospice doors. The Queen's smile had changed everything, not through magic or ceremony, but by reminding everyone involved that their work was a form of love made visible. 5 years after the Queen's inaugural visit to Maidenhead Hospice, the small facility that had once been just a community dream had become a beacon of hope recognized far beyond the borders of Berkshire. The transformation that began with a royal smile had evolved into something none of the original founders could have imagined, a movement that was changing how the entire nation approached end-of-life care. Dr. Sarah Mitchell stood in her expanded office, now serving as the Director of Hospice Development for a consortium of facilities across southern England. The walls were covered with photographs from hospice openings, medical conferences, and training programs that had all drawn inspiration from the Maidenhead model. What had started as her personal mission to improve care for terminal patients had become a professional calling that was reshaping healthcare policy at the national level. It's remarkable how one visit changed everything, said Professor Catherine Wells, a healthcare researcher from Oxford University who had been studying the impact of the Queen's visit on hospice care adoption across the country. She was reviewing data that showed a 40% increase in hospice. The Queen's endorsement gave hospice care a level of respectability and acceptance it had never enjoyed before, Professor Wells explained. Families who would have been reluctant to consider hospice care suddenly saw it as something worthy of royal approval. Medical professionals who had viewed it as giving up on patients began to see it as a specialized form of medical excellence. The research data told an impressive story. In the 5 years since the royal visit, 17 new hospices had opened in communities across England, each one citing the Maidenhead model as their inspiration. More significantly, public attitudes toward end-of-life care had shifted dramatically, with surveys showing that nearly 70% of respondents now viewed hospice care as a positive option for terminal patients, compared to just 30% before the Queen's visit. At Maidenhead Hospice itself, the changes have been equally profound. Rebecca Walsh, now in her 6th year as facility director, oversaw an operation that had expanded to include a daycare program for patients who didn't require residential care, a bereavement support center that served the wider community, and training institute that educated hospice professionals from around the world. The facility had also become a model for sustainable operations. The initial community fundraising effort had evolved into a sophisticated development program that included major donor relationships, corporate partnerships, and government funding. Most importantly, the hospice had achieved something rare in healthcare. It was consistently operating at capacity while maintaining the highest standards of care. We learned that excellence and efficiency aren't mutually exclusive, Rebecca explained to a group of visiting administrators from Scotland who were planning their own hospice facility. When you create an environment where staff members feel supported and valued, they naturally provide better care. When families feel respected and included in the care process, they become advocates for the program. The success of the Maidenhead model had attracted attention from unexpected quarters. International healthcare organizations had sent delegations to study their approaches to patient care, family support, and community engagement. The World Health Organization had featured the hospice in a report on best practices in palliative care, citing their integration of medical expertise with community support as a template for developing nations. But perhaps the most meaningful validation of the hospice's impact came from the families who continued to choose Maidenhead for their loved ones' final care. The facility maintained a waiting list of several weeks, despite the opening of other hospices in neighboring communities. Families specifically requested Maidenhead, often because they had heard stories from other families about the exceptional quality of care. Margaret Thompson's daughter Julie had become one of the hospice's most dedicated supporters, serving on the board of directors and heading the family support committee. Her mother's death in a sterile hospital room had been the catalyst for Dr. Mitchell's original vision, and Julie felt a special responsibility to ensure that vision continued to evolve and improve. Mother would be amazed to see what grew from her simple wish for somewhere peaceful to die, Julie reflected during the annual memorial service held in the hospice gardens. She always said that how we treat people in their most vulnerable moments says everything about who we are as a community. This place proves that we can be better than she ever imagined. The memorial garden had become one of the most beloved features of the hospice grounds. Designed as a living tribute to patients who had died at the facility, it featured memorial benches, commemorative trees, and seasonal flowers chosen by families to honor their loved ones. The garden served multiple purposes, providing a peaceful space for current patients and families, offering a place for bereaved relatives to visit and remember, and demonstrating to the community that death was a natural part of life worth honoring and remembering. Thomas Mitchell, now head of grounds for 3 hospices in the region, had developed expertise in therapeutic gardening that was being studied by landscape architects around the world. His approach to creating healing environments had influenced the design of hospitals, nursing homes, and other healthcare facilities far beyond the hospice community. Plants don't lie, Thomas often told visitors who toured the gardens. When families are in crisis, they need to be surrounded by life and growth and beauty. The Queen understood that immediately when she visited. She spent extra time in the gardens because she could feel what we were trying to create here. The influence of the Queen's visit extended beyond healthcare into areas no one had anticipated. The dignity and respect she had shown to dying patients had sparked broader conversations about how society viewed aging, illness, and death. Television programs began featuring more realistic portrayals of end-of-life care. Newspapers ran series about advanced directives and healthcare planning. Politicians began addressing palliative care in their healthcare policy proposals. The change was particularly evident in medical education. Several nursing schools had added mandatory rotations at Maidenhead Hospice to their curriculum, understanding that exposure to exceptional end-of-life care would make their graduates better healthcare providers in any setting. Medical schools began inviting hospice professionals to lecture about communication skills and family support techniques. Dr. Michael Roberts had left his position as medical director at Maidenhead to establish a fellowship program in palliative medicine at London University. The program, which included extended training at rural hospices like Maidenhead, was producing a new generation of physicians who understood that aggressive treatment and compassionate care were not mutually exclusive. The Queen's visit helped legitimize hospice medicine as a medical specialty. Dr. Roberts explained to his fellowship students during a lecture about the evolution of palliative care. Before that day, many physicians viewed hospice referrals as admissions of failure. Now we understand that skilled end-of-life care is one of the most challenging and important aspects of medical practice. The financial impact of the hospice model had also proven significant. Studies showed that patients who received hospice care had significantly lower healthcare costs in their final months, primarily because they avoided expensive and often futile hospital interventions. Insurance companies began actively promoting hospice care, and government healthcare programs expanded coverage for palliative services. This economic validation helped communities justify the investment in hospice facilities and programs. The business case for compassionate care had become as compelling as the moral case, making it easier for healthcare administrators to support hospice development. The technological advances inspired by the hospice movement were equally impressive. Medical equipment manufacturers had developed specialized devices for home and hospice use, focusing on comfort rather than life extension. Communication systems had been designed to help families stay connected with hospice teams. Even architectural firms had developed expertise in designing healing environments for end-of-life care. At Maidenhead, the integration of technology with personal care had created a model that balanced efficiency with intimacy. Electronic medical records allowed staff to spend more time with patients rather than on paperwork. Telemedicine capabilities enabled families to consult with specialists without leaving the hospice. Comfort-focused medical devices provided pain relief without the intimidating complexity of hospital equipment. The training programs that had grown out of the Maidenhead experience were perhaps the most lasting legacy of the Queen's visit. The Maidenhead Institute for Palliative Care had trained more than 1,000 healthcare professionals in the 5 years since its establishment. These graduates had carried the principles of dignified, compassionate care to hospitals, nursing homes, and other hospices throughout Europe and beyond. The training emphasized not just medical techniques, but the philosophy of care that had made Maidenhead special. Students learned about the importance of environmental design, family inclusion, community support, and cultural sensitivity. They practiced difficult conversations and learned to provide emotional support alongside medical care. Sister Mary Catherine, the nurse from St. Christopher's Hospice who had advised the Maidenhead team during their planning phase, had become a regular instructor at the Institute. Her decades of experience in hospice care provided historical context for the innovations developed at Maidenhead. What happened here after the Queen's visit represents the maturation of the hospice movement, she told a group of international students. We moved from being an alternative to mainstream medicine to being an essential component of comprehensive health care. That transformation required royal blessing, but it was sustained by the excellence of the care provided every day. The personal stories that emerged from 5 years of operations at Maidenhead had become part of the folklore of modern hospice care. Arthur Stevens' meeting with the Queen had been featured in books about royal encounters and end-of-life dignity. Emma Collins, now 13 years old, had written an essay about her grandfather's death that had been published in a national magazine and read by thousands of families dealing with similar losses. The essay, titled My Grandpa and the Queen, concluded with words that captured the essence of what the hospice had accomplished. When Grandpa was dying, I thought it was just sad. But at the hospice, I learned that dying can be sad and beautiful at the same time. The Queen understood that. She saw that Grandpa was still important, even when he was sick. That's what the hospice does. It helps people remember that being sick doesn't mean you stop being important. Current patients and families continued to benefit from the culture of excellence that the royal visit had inspired and validated. The daily routines at Maidenhead reflected the understanding that every interaction mattered, that every family deserved the same level of attention and respect that had been provided to Arthur Stevens and the other patients the Queen had met. Nurse Jennifer Murphy, now a supervisor at the facility, often shared the story of the royal visit with new staff members. The Queen didn't change how we did our jobs, she would explain. She showed us why our jobs mattered so much. Every patient we care for deserves royal treatment, because every life has dignity worth preserving. As the 5th anniversary of the Queen's visit approached, plans were being made for a celebration that would recognize both the facility's accomplishments and its ongoing commitment to exceptional care. The Queen had been invited to return, though her schedule would ultimately prevent another visit. Instead, she sent a personal letter acknowledging the hospice's continued excellence and expressing her pride in what the community had accomplished. The letter was framed and displayed in the reception area, where it served as a daily reminder to staff, patients, and families that their work was valued at the highest levels of society. But the real validation came not from royal recognition, but from the countless families who had found comfort and dignity during their most difficult moments. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, now recognized as one of the leading advocates for hospice care in the United Kingdom, often reflected on how far the movement had come since that conversation with Margaret Thompson in a hospital corridor. The dream of creating somewhere peaceful for people to die had evolved into a transformation of how society approached life's final chapter. The Queen's visit didn't create the hospice movement, she would tell audiences at medical conferences, but it legitimized our work and gave us the confidence to dream bigger. It showed us that caring for dying patients wasn't just a medical necessity. It was a moral imperative that deserved society's best efforts and resources. As the sun set over the memorial garden on another busy day at Maidenhead Hospice, the legacy of that October day in 2014 continued to unfold. Families gathered around bedsides, sharing final conversations and precious memories. Staff members moved quietly through the halls, providing medical care with the same attention to dignity and respect that had impressed the Queen years earlier. The royal visit had ended, but the smile the Queen had shared with Arthur Stevens and the other patients had become part of the hospice's permanent culture. It had taught everyone involved that compassion was not just a feeling, but a practice that could be cultivated, sustained, and shared with everyone who needed it. In the years to come, thousands more families would find comfort within the walls of Maidenhead Hospice and the many facilities it had inspired. Each of them would benefit from the transformation that began with a community's dream and was blessed by a monarch's smile. The legacy would continue to grow, one family at a time, one moment of dignity at a time, one act of compassionate care at a time. The Queen's visit had lasted less than 2 hours, but its impact would continue for generations, proving that sometimes the simplest gestures, a smile, a kind word, a moment of genuine attention, can change everything.